Welcome back to the Daily Vent. So, the next note I have here, I'll just read it as I have written down as I've been doing, and then I'll kind of maybe elaborate on how I might have changed my viewpoints or how I might describe it maybe a little bit better. But essentially, used to hear about what people saying online coming to bite them in a future job interview. I was optimistic at first, thinking the bullies won't get away with getting a good job and they will reap what they sow. Something to that effect. I was doing the quotations just because I had that in quotations, because that may have been kind of the internal thought at the time. But anyway, so then I said something to that effect. Even if my mind was not in the best place on this outlook, what can essentially be focused on here is that there will be consequences for those behaving badly. But then cancel culture and wokeness happened, and now you have a bunch of people losing opportunities or jobs because of crap reasons, and mob rule in some cases. So this, one of the nice things about going over these notes now is that you could kind of see how things have panned out from when they were written. So at the time that I wrote this, I think it was pretty bad. Like the cancel culture was kind of coming for people in I don't know about full force, but in pretty substantial force. And so you had people losing out on work opportunities or jobs just because either they were I'm trying to think of specific examples here. So it was probably something to the effect of either they were conservative or they said something 10 years ago that people viewed as racist, whether it was actually racist or not at the time that the person said it. And with racist intention, that might be a different story. Like, it might have not even been something that they meant in a racist way, but nowadays they're portraying it as racist, or maybe at the time it was fine to say, but now people view it as not okay. You could look at something that Don Lemon said on TV in 2013 and then compare it to Don Lemon in 2020 or 2021. It's kind of like a different train of thought from the same guy, right? Just 8 or 9 years or whatever amount of years removed, right? So, and even one of the examples that comes to mind is I think one year Kevin Hart was supposed to host the Oscars, and then he ended up getting canceled from doing that or losing out on that opportunity because I guess he said something on Twitter 10 years prior that was viewed as homophobic or whatever. Regardless of whether he meant it that way at the time, maybe he did, maybe he didn't. I don't know. Even know what he said. So I can't speak to the accuracy of the claim. But regardless, for something that he said a while ago, lost out on hosting the Oscars. That was something that I think he wanted to do for a while. I'm not sure if he said it was his dream or not. I don't know if he said that. But if it was something that he really wanted to do, and then he lost out on that because of a tweet from 10 years ago, it's wow, right? How things kind of come back to bite you, but not in the traditional way. Because normally when people talk about that, and that's what this note is kind of summarizing, is that there was this one time when I think it was in some place in elementary school where I don't remember what grade it was, but I think it was probably grade somewhere between grade 6 to 8. And we had these two people come and give a presentation. One of the ladies, I think it was more than just a presentation, but one of the ladies was talking about how they're building a supercomputer and it's going to keep track of everything that you ever said online. And then when you go for a job interview, they're going to pull that up and then they're going to decide, I don't know if they said they're going to decide based off that whether or not you get the job, or if they're going to consider that. Regardless, it may have a impact or an effect on whether you get the job or not. That's kind of maybe the gist of what she was saying. And so at the time, I'm kind of thinking about it optimistically, where I'm oh, dude, so all the bullies, it's they're going to mess around and find out, essentially. They're going to have consequences for their actions or whatever. And that maybe is not the best mindset to have, because at the end of the day, as a Christian, you should forgive, and you should want people to improve and get better. Now, that doesn't mean that it's forgiveness is not void of consequence, in the sense that you could forgive somebody, but maybe justice should still be enacted on them in a certain way, right? If somebody stabbed you or whatever, maybe they should still go to jail, you know what I mean? But you should forgive them for doing that, or at least that's how I interpret how we're supposed to live. I think is we should forgive one another. And I won't get too much into the theology behind that, but I think that's a fairly basic concept in Christendom, is forgiveness. And so, like, that's kind of like an area where I could correct how I might have thought formerly when I was younger about stuff like this, because regardless, like, you should forgive. But at the time I was just thinking like, they're going to get consequences for their bad actions, and maybe for some things, maybe that would be a good thing to, to have, consequences for bad things that they had done to other people online or whatever. But at the same time, we should forgive. And at the same time, we should want everybody to repent, change. We should want to get better, stuff like that. And ultimately, like, repent and believe on the Lord Jesus, right? So when it comes to how I thought about this at the time, I might have thought about it with more of like an optimistic perspective, regardless of whether or not that basis was in the right mindset or not. Regardless, that's how I was thinking about it at the time. But how we saw it pan out in like 2021, like whenever all the George Floyd stuff was happening, where like when all of a sudden like there's this like explosion of like racism hunting, where like probably a bunch of people that aren't really racist, or maybe not even saying a whole lot of crazy stuff, are kind of just getting called out and labeled as that because they said something that would have been considered fine to say like 10 years ago, but now it's like considered not okay or whatever, like deemed unfit or whatever. And so then you have all these people that might just be normal people with reasonable perspectives, and they might have like friends of all different kinds of shapes, sizes, and colors, right? But now all of a sudden they're getting like thrown under the bus or losing out opportunities because they don't want to toe that line and like, bow down to this, woke control complex, right? And so you have this mob rule as well, which at the time might have been really strong on Twitter or on various social media, calling for certain people to have like justice done to them or exacted upon them or whatever. But it's all like what's a bummer is that what was initially thought of by me like years prior, like this concept was thought of like, oh, it would be done like in the proper way. And then it became like this like ridiculous thing where it's like a lot of these people that are getting justice exacted upon them are probably just like fairly normal, fairly decent people. And the people exacting the justice are all these people that might be, or some of them might be kind of like vile or racist themselves, right? Like the people that would say that all white people are racist, like, is that not racist? And like, are these the people that are running the show that are talking like this? And and you could get into like diversity quotas and all these other things, DEI, all the buzzwords, right? What is equity, right? What does equity actually mean? And were the words like manipulated to try to evoke certain responses or maybe emotionally manipulate people? And so like everybody kind of got maybe whipped up into this frenzy, or at least some people might have gotten like emotionally controlled and manipulated during that time. Now things fortunately have kind of like leveled off, where it seems like woke is dying out more and more. The only problem is that like it sucks that it takes so long to fizzle out. And I think during this time in COVID, when all this craziness was happening, I was kind of worried that it wouldn't fail hard enough. Because I think what I wanted to happen is I wanted all the woke stuff to fail so hard that no one would ever try it again. I think that was probably my mindset at the time. And it's like, this needs to fail so hard that they'll never do it again. And I think my fear is that it wouldn't fail hard enough, that it would just kind of fail maybe a little bit, and they'll be like, in another however many years, they're like, oh, maybe we'll try it again. Like, that's what you don't want to happen. Like, it needs to like be so obviously a bad idea or something like that, to where you're like, no, this is not feasible. This is not like a financial prospect we're willing to pursue. This is not a goal that is going to work. So we're just not going to do it ever again. And I don't know. It's like, how much does it take for the camel's back to break? You know what I mean? And I don't know that there was that threshold hit. Because like, how much money can Disney afford to lose on a lot of these projects that humor this kind of ideology? How much are they willing to foot the bill? And it's kind of surprising how continuously a lot of these things continue to do it. And that's why I kind of had this theory. I don't know if this is actually true. This is just kind of me wondering, because like, if all these companies are continuing to lose money on a lot of these projects that have like some woke stuff sprinkled in, some diversity, equity, and inclusion ideology, And most people, like, and this is the cleverness of the language crafting that they're doing. They make it sound like what they're doing is so virtuous and like good or innocent or whatever, that if you have any problem with it, it makes you sound bad, because it's like, how could you disagree with diversity, equity, and inclusion, and you know, and a movement that is called Black Lives Matter and all these other things? Like, how could you disagree with such basic fundamental things? And it's like, isn't that how they get you? Like, you name it something that is so easily agreeable with on a surface level that it kind of would make you look bad for coming out in opposition against it on any level. And that's maybe part of the genius behind how they name these things, because you name it something like, you know, I think Tim Pool gave an example a while ago where it's like, we love puppies or something like that. Like, who's going to disagree with a movement called We Love Puppies, you know, or whatever. But then it's like, what if like the We Love Puppies movement wants to like outlaw cats? You know, like, this is like, I'm just continuing to add up and make further examples on top of this. I don't even know how much of this Tim Pool said. I think I don't even know if he named the fake movement that, but for the sake of analogy here, that it's like, when you name something so cleverly, it helps the manipulation process. So it takes probably a lot of guts and courage to be able to stand out against it and be like, you know what, no. Like Candace Owens was talking about how she was like, I don't know if she was the first or one of the first prominent black voices to stand out against the BLM movement, and as far as I understand, she took a lot of heat for it. I don't remember when she first took a stand against it. I don't know if it was back when it first kind of came on the scene in like 2016-ish, or was it 2014? I think it was 2016-ish. And then I don't know if she started her campaign against it then, or if it was more recently. It probably was in 2016 if she was one of the first people to come out against it in terms of prominent black voices. But and Candace continues to, I think, try to, at least for the most part, be the one who's willing to stick their neck out before it's like considered safe to do so. Like, she was just talking about that recently, about how there's these conservatives that kind of wait around until it's like okay or trendy or the climate is agreeable to sticking your neck out against something, but by that point you're not even really sticking your neck out anymore. And then they come out and support the thing, like, oh yeah, you know, this is wrong. And it's like, well, where were you like X amount of months ago when nobody was saying anything? You know, like, that's kind of what Candace was talking about, and that's pretty true. And so, like, are you willing to be hated for what is right, and are you willing to be the first one through the door to be hated for the sake of the truth of the matter? And truth goes beyond just like specific scenarios. Like, there are, and some truths are more important than others, right? Like, there's a scale of priorities, right? Or there should be a scale of priorities in a believer's life. So all this to be said, what I thought in concept of keeping a track of what people are saying and doing online, and then that coming to terms, or that becoming something that becomes subject of whether you get a job or not. Initially, I was thinking like, oh, good. Like, regardless of whether I had the right foundational thinking at the time, it was like, oh, okay, there's going to be like accountability. But then now accountability has been made into this, that sigh kind of summarizes it pretty well. Accountability has been made into this, softened, progressive word that is used basically to kind of browbeat or drag anyone through the mud that we don't like or disagree with ideologically, regardless of whether or not they are morally wrong about something or morally, in the wrong. Like, essentially, like, accountability they might use to, come against a conservative for not supporting the LGBT movement, and they might make it seem like, oh, this is accountability time, and it's like, but what you're holding people accountable for is not even necessarily like a good faith thing. It's maybe just, for some people, it's like an opportunity to kind of take down the opposition. It's like everything that might have been seen as a good thing in the beginning has kind of been made into this potentially very evil use, or potentially like evil in the sense that like what all the things that were started with good intentions have been like co-opted and used for bad motives and bad like campaigns or bad movements, right? And that's the bummer, is that it's like, dude, You know, why'd you have to ruin a good idea or a good thing, you know? And so sometimes it's like, this is why we can't have nice things, is because it's like everything that, you know, comes out or gets, you know, released, and it's like, oh, this is gonna be great. And then like it gets co-opted, and like how fast does it get co-opted? And it's like, I think, and you could argue that part of why this happens is like maybe people are not vigilant enough to actually see through the crap. And so they're just like, okay, you know, whatever you say. And then like when it comes around in a few years to bite you, and then if they start putting litter boxes in high schools or whatever because people are identifying as cats, then like, you know, do we only have ourselves to blame for not saying, you know what, this is wrong, this is ridiculous. So I said that story about the litter boxes, but I'm going to look up to see if that's actually a thing that happened. I've heard about it, but I think initially it might have been something that was like a joke, but then it actually became a thing. And that's why like nowadays it's almost more like, I think this was something I said during like 2021 or 2022, where it's like things might start as a joke, but it's like, I think my response sometimes was like, just give it time. It's like, it's a joke now, but just give it time. And then it might actually like become reality. Like it almost feels like, it doesn't matter what it is. It's like if you give it enough time and you let the progressive movement kind of spin on it, or spin some sort of sloganry, or spin some sort of idea out of it, eventually it could come to fruition, you know, or come to define fruition. Because we say all these words, but what do they mean? You know? So realization of something desired or worked for, accomplishment. Yeah, so realization of something desired or worked for. Okay, yeah, fruition. Come into reality, or anyway. So high school puts in litter boxes for kids identifying as cats. I think this actually happened. I mean, I could be wrong about this example. I just thought it actually happened. Schools use litter boxes for kids identified as cats. There is no credible evidence to support the claim that any high school has installed litter boxes for students identified as cats. The notion has been thoroughly debunked by multiple sources, including official statements from school districts. Fact check website. Okay, whenever it says fact checking websites and news outlets, this is the thing that people need to like potentially wake up to. If the ends justify the means, right? And who's funding these fact checking websites and news outlets, and who are they siding with? Who are they getting their money from? What is their ideology? If the ends justify the means, do you think that they'll try to misrepresent something to say that it's false when it is not actually false? It's like Snopes. I used to, I think favorably of Snopes like in the beginning, and then I think based off of like some stuff that Crowder was talking about, it made me kind of like no longer trust Snopes. Because if you ever watch like episodes that Crowder does where like they fact check the fact checkers, and yeah, I mean you could argue that is Steven wrong about his counter fact checks? You can make that argument, but regardless, it's like, is it worth noting that just because they say that something is the fact of the matter, that doesn't necessarily mean it's the fact of the matter? But like people are kind of used to like these head honcho organizations being like the kind of, I don't know if the correct term is the arbiters of truth, or the people that have it figured out or whatever. And it's like, do they really? So interviews with teachers, administrators, and parents who have not reported such. Okay, so teachers and administrators, that's another. So the parents, I think I would trust the parents more, unless the parents are completely ideological bent towards that already. But teachers and administrators, is it true that in California they had a bill where parents don't have to tell the parents if the kid chooses to take on a different name or even different gender? Okay. Okay, California bill exempts teachers based on the provided search results. The California bill that prohibits schools from requiring teachers to notify parents when a student identifies as transgender or non-binary is Assembly Bill AB 2282. or 2218, signed into law. So it's not just a bill, it's law now, as far as I understand. Signed into law by Governor Gavin Newsom on July 17th, 2024. That's recent. I thought that happened in like 2022 or 2021, but that's recent. AB 2218. It might have been proposed a couple years before, but maybe it actually got passed now. So AB 2218 ensures that schools cannot mandate teachers or staff to disclose a student's gender identity or sexual orientation to parents without the student's consent. Oh boy. So this is the interesting thing here. Students' consent, right? So we have this interesting kind of, and you could go down the rabbit hole in this, but we have this interesting in a bad way kind of trend happening where it's like we put so much responsibility on the youths, the children, whatever word you want to use, to make all these decisions, right? And it's like, and they're still like becoming people, like growing into fully formed adults, right? So it's like we're putting this level of responsibility on them and giving this responsibility that they have to give consent to the teachers in order to tell the parents of the child about these things that they're thinking about, right? And it's like, when has that ever been like the common way of going about it, where it's like we're going to leave it up to the student to tell one adult whether it's okay to tell the biological parents of that student what's going on. And some people could probably make examples of where, like, okay, certain students might go to like a counselor about something and say, please don't tell my parents about, whether they're having like suicidal thoughts or something like that. Like, or even like, the doctor, please, like say they go to the doctor and it's like, the doctor, please don't tell my mom and dad about XYZ issue I have right now. I don't know if that's a thing that you're legally allowed to do. Maybe it depends on where you live. Like, I'm just kind of guessing at certain examples where maybe people could justify it, be reasonable, that people would be told or advised not to tell the parents of the child or the youth about a certain thing. Maybe there's certain scenarios you can make arguments for. But when it comes to something like this, it's like, is it so unreasonable that, especially if you view like this as part of a mental health crisis and a spiritual issue, a spiritual like depravity, like isn't this like something that shouldn't the parents know? Like, that's their kid, and also, like, aren't the parents paying the salary of the teachers unless you go to even if you go to a private school? But isn't like the taxpayer, if it's publicly funded education, the taxpayer pays the salary of the staff? Correct me if I'm wrong. That staff, if it is paid by the parents of the student, right? So if all the staff, all the teachers' salary is essentially paid for by the parents, and these parents are entrusting their child to the teachers, then isn't it reasonable that they would keep the parents up to date about what's going on in their kid's life at school when the parents are not there? Is that such an unreasonable thing to expect, right? Especially if they're paying their salary, right? So what are we paying you for, man? And again, you can make the argument of, okay, well, it's like tax dollars go to the government, then the government pays it, whatever. It's like, okay, who is funding the thing? Who is funding the thing? And so in some cases, or probably a lot of cases, you can make that argument. So why is there so much onus on the youth to figure out, who has the right to do and say what happened to parents being in charge of their children? Because, like, they're the parents. So, and this is like how you get, and then everything that they're teaching in the schools, like, are you naturally pushing children in this direction to consider these things that they wouldn't have considered to nearly the same level 20 years ago? Like, let's go back to 2004 for a second and think about how simple life used to be. I think that's kind of the thing that's maybe a bit painful about all this craziness, is it's like, has life sped up so much and so much crap been introduced in such full force and pushed so hard on everybody that, like, if you just kind of take a step back and, like, get yourself out of the situation for a second and just think about how far we've come and how far we've fallen in many ways, like how far down the tubes this all is, and you just think about, like, what was 2005 like, like, let's go back and get examples of what life was like back then. And you could argue some of it maybe is rose-tinted glasses or nostalgia talking here. And yeah, that's probably true too. But like objectively, let's think about this. Like, what was life like pre-social media dominance, pre all this crazy gender ideology and race baiting? You know, like, what was it like when people just kind of did their thing? Just lived, lived regular lives, And not everybody was always comparing themselves to everybody else all the time online with all like these highlight reels of all the good things that, that people are doing. And it seems like, oh, their life was so amazing. It's like, are you only seeing the highlight reel? So then is that why their life looks so amazing and you don't see all of the other times, right? So with that said, what may have been thought to be beneficial is the very thing that may have came to bite you in the end. So the implementation of systems of accountability may have become the very thing that made your life harder in the end. Like the thing that you thought was going to help you ended up maybe hurting you if it comes down to, the system to bring accountability for people acting badly. But then now, who defines what acting badly is? Right? Especially if you have a society that is not based on biblical values or is getting further away from that, then, is up down and is down up. If they call what is evil good, then now all the people that are doing good now thought of as evil by those people in control. And so then now you think, oh yeah, and even you expand this into AI, like, oh yeah, we're going to do all this, like, what is internet regulation or policing or whatever, and it's like, that might sound good on paper, but then, like, who is using the tools? Who is running the joint? And then once you realize that, hey man, maybe this seemed good, but is it actually applied in a good way? I just realized I didn't go to the full screen, or the full webcam there. So yeah, is it good? Is it actually good? And the bummer, and this is kind of maybe what would lead people to more of a libertarian small government ideology, is that if you realize like the sin nature that people have and how things could be used against you, then maybe that would just make you advocate for less regulation, less top-down control, because if you want generally the most freedom for yourself and your family, then maybe you're like, you know what, as much as they might make a convincing argument for the government being more in control of XYZ, I realize that maybe there's bad people in government that will manipulate XYZ for other reasons that I don't like. And so maybe it's better off to have this scary freedom than this tyrannical security, right? Like, doesn't China have like a bunch of cameras everywhere? Like, was it Shanghai the most surveilled city? It might be New York, who knows? In full transparency, or at least to what degree I can say, these AI summarizations may be inaccurate. So just keep that in mind. Like, there are like some sources. I think these are the sources that they use to gather the information. But like, I just want to let you know, like, this could be wrong. Whatever it says here. Based on the provided search results, Shanghai, China is not explicitly mentioned as the most surveilled city with cameras. Instead, Chongqing, China is mentioned as having the most surveillance cameras per population, with approximately 168 cameras per 1,000 people, according to an analysis published in 2019. Is also mentioned Taiwan. Taiwan? I don't know. It's probably not Taiwan, but Taiwan? Taiwan? However you say that.
Taiwan.
There you go. China is also mentioned as having the most CCTV cameras per capita. Okay, so this place in China is also mentioned as having the most CCTV cameras per capita, with 117 cameras per 1,000 inhabitants, according to Statista data from 2021. So, with increased security can come increased risk to your freedom and your, you could say, maybe well-being of life, depending on how the things are used and who is in control of them, right? So that's why it's like one of the biggest arguments maybe that you could talk about this with is when it comes to gun control, where it's like, what is the actual reason for the problems, right? Is it that guns are available, or is there other things that are causing people to, in larger amounts, misuse certain tools? And so you could make these arguments for gun regulation, right? But if you take away all the guns, are people that want to do bad things going to still do bad things in different ways? And then the response argument to that might be like, well, yes, but you minimize the level of carnage by limiting the tools to more primitive methods. You can make that argument. But, I mean, bombings are still a thing, and there's lots of different kinds of ways that people could probably make bombs. And there's other, like, tools that could be used for mayhem other than guns. So it's like, what are we talking about? You know, and are you willing to, in hopes of trying to fix the problem with a solution that may be improper or not actually addressing the root cause, you know, are you willing to give that level of control over to some government that could use it for just what they want to use it for and not necessarily for what you want them to use it for? It's like, once you give that over to a government body to then control, like, you might never get it back. And it might be used for something that you really don't like, but you signed it over. So is it better to just take the risky freedom then? Because at least then, if you're, like, given the opportunity to make decisions for yourself and kind of exercise some personal responsibility, and if everybody's doing that and we all kind of, like, you know, rise to the occasion and, like, actually try to, you know, take some responsibility and do what's right, maybe you get a better society and a better populace that is more common sense, right? Like, if people say common sense ain't all that common, at some point common sense may have been more common, possibly. Why did it go away? Why did common sense become less common? Is it because we started to just give everything over to something else? Like, you know, did common sense become less common because we tried to continually offload more and more responsibility to other people to do things for us, and as a result we just became less apt to function in our own lives? Is that possible? I could be wrong, but, you know, regardless, we'll leave that there. So thank you for watching the Daily Vent.